I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Wall Street's attention will turn to Chicago as the annual meeting of the American Society of Clinical Oncology runs from May 29th to June 2nd. Some 5,000 abstracts became available mid-month, and investors have been sifting through them to gain insights into which drug makers will rise and fall on news from the meeting. We spoke to Adam Feuerstein, senior columnist for TheStreet's, about ASCO 2015, what the early abstracts say, and who will likely be making headlines at the meeting this year. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Danny, it's good to be here.
As you get ready to head off Chicago for the ASCO annual meeting, it seems like it's going to be a busy year. More than 5,000 abstracts have already been released, and several ones of high interest are still to come. Before we jump into individual companies and drugs, how do you find keeping up with the sheer volume of data this year, and how has it changed over the 15 years you've been attending the meeting?
Yeah, I'm like an ASCO veteran. I'm like an old timer. They should give me a walker to help get around that place. You're right. I mean, the complexity of the data, the complexity of the science has increased over the time. The time that I've covered ASCO, the amount of data that's presented and discussed has grown. So it's overwhelming. I mean, you really, it's funny. You can't, you can't look at it all. It's like, it's like going to the Louvre. You can't go to, let's say, to go to the Louvre and you're going to see every piece of art, and you can't do that at ASCO either. You can't see every drug. So you sort of have to pick and choose sort of what's important to you.
Well, immunotherapy has been an area of buzz for the past few years, and that's expected to continue. Merck's Keytruda and Bristol Myers Squibb's Opdivo, already approved, have new data coming out. What are the compelling results you're going to be watching for with these drugs and new indications?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the past several ASCOs, the checkpoint inhibitors, the PD-1 inhibitors, have kind of dominated the meeting. And this year, you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see that happen again. I think the difference this year is, the past meetings we've sort of focused on melanoma. Kind of as the sort of was the first indication where we saw the efficacy of these checkpoint inhibitors, and now we're starting to see it in lung. And I think this meeting you're going to start seeing a lot of data in a broader swath of cancers. You're going to see some data in head and neck. You're going to see some data in ovarian. You're going to see some data in liver. And I think what's interesting, the way I look at it perspective-wise, is you think about like a drug like Avastin, which a groundbreaking cancer drug, and probably the most widely used targeted therapy across about 6 different indications in solid tumors. And I think one thing you're going to kind of see out of this ASCO meeting is you're going to see sort of what's taking shape is the checkpoint inhibitors are going to eventually be approved in as many cancer indications as Avastin is, maybe even more. And I think that's kind of a big takeaway message.
Well, there is a fair bit of new competition heading their way. What results from potential competitors to Keytruda and Opdivo do you think are going to be the most compelling and worth watching?
Well, Roche, Roche obviously is a big powerhouse, and they've got their PD-L1 inhibitor, which is I've lost track of how many phase 3 studies that's being run. There's going to be some data in lung cancer that's going to be highly anticipated and presented at the meeting. AstraZeneca has got a PD-1 inhibitor. So maybe, that's kind of one of the differences between these drugs and something like Avastin, where sort of Avastin kind of stood on its own. And here you have all these checkpoint inhibitors. And so far the data really look very similar. And so it's going to be interesting to see sort of how the drugs differentiate from each other. One of the things that's kind of the trending now is, the use of biomarkers. Is there a way to look at the genetic signatures of these cancers to determine in advance which patients are going to respond better than others? And that may be one way that some of these PD-1 inhibitors, checkpoint inhibitors, differentiate from each other.
Well, there are some showdowns of sorts that'll be playing out at ASCO. In the area of lung cancer, there's been ongoing competition between Clovis Oncology and AstraZeneca. Both will be presenting data back to back. How do you expect this to play out at ASCO?
Yeah, I mean, I think the new data we'll probably get. I mean, I don't know how much new data we're going to get from AstraZeneca because they just presented an updated results in I guess it was the fall. But we will get new updated results from Clovis's lung cancer drug. So again, you're right. It's kind of a competitive battle between the two companies. You know, they both said they're going to file at the FDA around the same time. So people are definitely sort of making that kind of head-to-head comparison, looking at the two drugs, which is better. And so we'll get a lot of that. We'll get a lot of that this weekend.
Well, in the area of breast cancer, investors will be watching to see how Puma does versus Oncothyron. Any thoughts on those two?
Yeah, Puma is, a bit of controversial drug. Looking at their drug neratinib in sort of the extended adjuvant setting. I think the controversy there is kind of from a stock standpoint in that, investors expect that company or want that company to be sold. And it's a relatively expensive company right now because there is this anticipation that it will be sold. But, the question is whether neratinib, provides enough benefit to breast cancer patients, that HER2 positive breast cancer patients in that extended adjuvant setting to warrant the market valuation of Puma. And then Oncothyron has a competing HER2 breast cancer drug. And you look at the disparity in market value. I think Oncothyron, I think their market cap is in the $300-400 million range. So versus Puma's $6 billion. So the Oncothyron's drug is much earlier stage. We're going to get some data at the meeting that we'll get a chance to sort of kick the tires at and look at, see what the prospects are there.
Well, also in the area of breast cancer, there's going to be late-stage trial results for Pfizer's Ibrance, which won accelerated approval earlier this year based on mid-stage data. How much is at stake for Pfizer, and will the focus be on overall survival?
Yeah, I think it will be. Obviously, they sort of got that accelerated early approval, and now, these larger studies will be coming out to kind of see what the real benefit is. I think that data is coming out over the weekend, so we'll get a chance to see that.
The IPO market was quite excited by the CAR T stocks, Juno, Kite, Bellicum. Investor enthusiasm has cooled a bit, but will ASCO reignite them?
There's not a ton of I don't think that there's a ton of data, new data, significant data at this year's ASCO. Mainly because ASCO focuses mostly on solid tumors. And so where we've seen most of the excitement and most of the real dramatic results with the CAR T therapies has been in the blood cancers, the hematological stuff. So I think it's still kind of unclear as kind of what role the CAR T therapies will play in solid tumors. Obviously, the companies are working to develop those therapies in solid tumors, but it's really early days. And at this meeting, I don't think you're going to see much that's kind of change opinion.
You've expressed some interest in Celldex Therapeutics' cancer vaccine, Rintiga. There's going to be results released on the vaccine in recurrent brain tumors. What are you going to be watching here, and what do you find compelling?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty important data for Celldex. So last fall, the company released basically interim results from a study of Rintiga, which is a cancer immunotherapy vaccine in recurrent GBM patients. And surprisingly, the study showed a survival benefit in that study. So we're going to get this weekend on Sunday morning, we'll get an update, basically what amounts to sort of final results from that study. So what we're looking for is for the benefit that we saw back in the fall to be sustained. You kind of want to see that, in the final data that the survival benefit and the other sort of positive efficacy and results that we saw, you want to see those maintained in the final data. And then after that, the company has already said that they're going to be talking to the FDA about whether or not these data are sufficient to file on. And so, along with the data, the company hopefully will provide some kind of update from a regulatory standpoint.
Well, ASCO has taken some efforts in recent years to address the issue of cost of cancer therapies through efforts to provide guidance on the value of drugs. There's a major session on the global perspective of value on Saturday at the meeting. Do you see any threat from an investor perspective that oncologists will have success at pushing back on cancer drug prices?
The pricing issue in cancer on oncology drugs has been talked about at the last couple of ASCO meetings. Last year, ASCO kind of used it it was sort of one of their themes discussing kind of the value of cancer drugs and sort of bringing pricing into the discussion. And I expect that will happen this year. It kind of fits the general theme. And Danny, you and I have talked about this in the past, just about this overall theme of, pushback from insurance companies and PBMs in terms of pricing and access to drugs. In just this week, we saw Express Scripts, again, sort of raise the issue of controlling costs in oncology, and how in different ways or strategies they can, maybe compare the effectiveness of different oncology drugs, and maybe have, the same drug priced differently by indication depending on how effective it is. So I think that you're right. I think this is going to be, it is, these meetings are mainly about the data, and about the science, but, you can't ignore the economics of the business as well.
Any speculation on who has the most to gain or who has the most to lose this year at ASCO?
No, I mean, not again. I think that it's going to be another strong meeting probably for the big pharma. These meetings. It's funny from a stock perspective. Stocks kind of run up into it, and then Monday rolls around and you see stocks sell off. That's kind of the traditional pattern that we see, and I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but it won't surprise me if it does. But again, I think what you're looking for, investors have sort of baked in a lot of value into the PD-1, the checkpoint inhibitors. So, those data need to perform, those studies and the stuff that we're going to see at ASCO this year need to sort of beat those expectations.
And as a full-service reporter, among the tweeting you're expected to be doing this week is covering the local beers of Chicago. Chicago's been a bit of a hotbed.
I like my craft beer, so I hope to be starting Friday night when I arrive. I hope to be sampling as many as I possibly can.
Well, there are more than 60 microbreweries and nanobreweries in the city. Do you have a favorite or one you're looking to?
I don't actually have a favorite in Chicago because I don't know much about Midwestern beers. I'm sort of a hyper local beer guy, so I tend to drink a lot of my New England Boston-y beers. But I know of a couple of really good bars and restaurants to go to, so I'm hoping to get an education in sort of Midwest craft beer making.
Adam Feuerstein, senior columnist for TheStreet.com. Adam, thanks as always.
All right, thanks, Danny.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.